Hello everyone, this is Miss Robinson here with your next lesson about how to make effective speech writing. So I hope we're all ready and raring to go. This obviously, as Miss Eggleton said, is a separate qualification, so it's really important for us to be able to get this qualification, stick it on our CV, make us look amazing. So I'm going to treat this lesson as I would any other lesson. So if there are any points where I'll tell you to pause the video, please do so, and then you can make notes, write answers down, complete tasks. So in a second I would like you to pause the video and you can write the title, learn objective, and the keywords, and have a think about the recap for the do now. So we are looking today at effective speech writing. We're going to be looking at writing for text type, audience and purpose, which I hope you're very familiar with by now, also known as TAP. And we're also going to be specifically looking at range of linguistic, fancy word for language, so range of language devices, so making our writing amazing. For recapping, I'll just have a think back to last lesson. What's the main difference between language and literature exams? How are these going to be working differently from now on from everything that we've done last year? We also, keywords for today are rhetoric, text type, audience and purpose. So take a minute now just to make a note of everything you need, and then pause the video and then carry on. Okay, so by the end of this lesson, we would hope to be able to understand the TAP of your spoken language assessment, which is absolutely vital in making sure that you're writing and creating the right presentation. Identifying effective speech writing techniques, so looking at other people's speeches and how they've done it, and then basically planning and using them for ourselves. So that's what we are going to be looking at today. Hopefully in your recap you would have got something along the lines of the fact that language is a skill-based exam, basically 2 exams, both skills, testing your skills in reading and writing. So it's not particularly like literature, we've had to revise quotes. It's more about getting those skills and being able to tackle the text when you get them. The texts are completely unseen, we don't know what's going to come on them, so that's how they are mainly different. Language as well comes in the form of non-fiction and fiction. So paper 1 is fiction or creative writing, and non-fiction for paper 2. Okay, so keywords for today are rhetoric, text type, audience, purpose. So hopefully you should be very familiar with TAP, but we'll just have a quick go over them just in case. So rhetoric. We talk about rhetoric, you probably recognise it from rhetorical question. Rhetoric is basically a word we use to encompass all language, any language at all that is designed to have an impressive or persuasive effect. So anything, it often comes when we look at speeches or even letters, anything that you are needing to do, and it's really important for your GCSE exam for language, so I'll speak to you about that shortly. So text type is what we're going to be writing. If I said to you, go on and write something, you'd really annoyed because you wouldn't know what we were doing. So text type I always think of as the what, and in this case, you're writing a speech. The audience is who you're aiming at. So in this instance, it's us, it's going to be in front of me, and in front of your classmates. The reason it has to have some classmates involved is that you need to be able to answer questions. So it can't unfortunately be just you, but we will discuss that nearer the time, so don't stress about that yet. Finally, your purpose is going to be actually a mixed bag. It's the why you're writing, and really great speeches show that they understand it isn't just one purpose to writing a speech. Speeches quite often come informative because they're informing the audience of a topic and giving information. However, really good speeches entertain us and make us listen. And usually as well, because they come with a topic base, usually going to be argumentative and persuasive because you want the audience to be on your side and listen to you and what you've got to say. So I'm going to look today at how we can make sure that we encompass all of those purposes. We're not just writing a speech that just gives information. We want to be able to intrigue, excite, persuade, impress the audience. Okay, so the reason this is so important, being able to effectively write a speech, isn't just for this one particular thing. It's important for another reason as well, or more than one. First reason is actually it can come up in paper two. Because as you can see, if you look on my with my arrow here, paper two is the non-fiction paper, and it will always require you to do a writing question, and they often are either one of three things: a speech, an article, or a letter. So they want you to be able to replicate it in your writing. You will be expected to not only write your speech for this presentation, but they will potentially be able to write a speech in the exam as well. So if we can get this down and make it amazing, you're actually setting yourself two opportunities to be successful. Additionally, you don't know when you're going to be asked to give a speech in a future life. Now, I know that some people are particularly shy, but that's nothing to worry about, guys. You need to be able to speak. Potentially here, you're going to be going up against going towards interviews at colleges, or interviews even just to be a prefect. You're going to potentially go for interviews in jobs. Your particular jobs might require you to do formal verbal presentations. It could be stuff in your personal life where you're maybe asked to do a speech for somebody's wedding or funeral, which is something I've had to be able to do. So you have to be, this isn't just designed to get you stressed out and make you upset. This is a really, really good skill to have in the future life. So you don't know when it's going to come up, and hopefully, if you're more comfortable with it now, it will set you up well for the future. So I want you to pause the video now and have a think about what makes a great speech, what makes an amazing, amazing speech. So if you'd like to use a mind map, or you can bullet point your ideas, just have a go. Anything that springs to your mind, what would you class as amazing speech? What's going to be involved in it? Okay, off you go. Okay, so some of the things you should have. Great speeches grab the audience's attention. They have a clear topic, so it's something that is clear throughout. You've not gone waffling off on a tangent. You're not going to talk about any random things. And that, it means, if you don't have waffle, it means it's well structured. It's planned, it's well structured. Very, very hard to speak and do a spontaneous speech if you haven't planned it already. It's very difficult to do that, for be able to speak for a certain amount of time, which is what you're going to have to do. Best speeches I've ever seen have been powerful and passionate. They're not boring, basically. And they also have an element of persuasion and argument in there. So you want the audience to kind of be on your side, rooting for you, especially with the topics you're going to be dealing with. They are powerful, important topics you want people to be on your side with. They are going to be entertaining, and therefore, hopefully, they'll be memorable as well. Do not underestimate great vocabulary. The best speeches are the speeches with that amazing vocab, that really just choosing that makes all the difference. And one more thing we're going to look at today is that wide range of language devices. Now, the reason I've talked about this is more the speech writing. You will talk in later lessons and discuss and think about what makes a great presentation. So some of you might have put clear voice, good volume. That's all brilliant. That's not wrong, but we're not dealing with that right now. We're dealing with just the writing side of it first, okay? So, some language devices that you will probably come across before. We quite often use this acronym, or forms of this acronym. So I want you to have a go now. Just pause the video. How many of them can you remember? So the acronym we have used, or some people have used, is Dave Forrester. So what do each of those letters, which language device do they represent? Okay, pause the video, have a go. Okay, so Dave stands for direct address, when you are directly addressing. We're not talking about address where you live, it's talking address as in speaking to someone. Direct address is when you directly address the audience, and loads of adverts do that. How do you eat yours is one of my favorite ones. It's cream egg, obviously, but how do you, speaking using those words, you. Okay, alliteration obviously does what it says on the tin. We speak about alliteration a lot in our writing, just using the same letter for multiple words. Vocabulary clearly is just something that we need to be aware of with whatever writing we use. And then emotive language, trying to use particular language, vocabulary choices to create an emotion in the audience. So, for example, quite often you see emotive language when you look at charity adverts, for example, children starving, and they use a lot of that vocabulary to make you feel really, really sympathetic and upset. Okay, facts. Opinions, which I hope you would be aware of. Facts are those true, informative information we can't dispute. Opinions are your personal feelings towards that topic. We have those rhetorical questions where you ask the audience a question. You don't expect an answer, it's just there to make them think. Again, we've already had emotive language. Statistics are really important. Where they are basically facts but in number form. So 9 out of 10 people agree that this shampoo is amazing. You see them all the time in those adverts. Triple is where we use 3 reasons or 3 adjectives or 3 examples, and it just emphasizes something important to make it clear. Evidence, we're going to come and talk to about that soon, where you can provide real life evidence of the topic you're talking about. And repetition, which again is just repeating words to really add an impact on the audience. So there's the sort of things you could be using. I hope you made a note of them so that you can use them in your own speech writing. Okay, so let's have a look at how it's done. This is probably one of the most famous speeches. I've left the clip down here on the YouTube, so feel free in your own time to have a watch of that and have a think about it. Now, this is from the end, actually. It's not the whole speech, it's quite long. It's from the end of one of the most famous speeches in history. It's Martin Luther King Jr. In 1963, outside in Washington, addressing a crowd of over 200,000 people, and he's asking them to kind of get on board and take action against racial injustice in the 60s in America, when racism, segregation was absolutely awful. So have a look. I'll read it for you now, and I want you to pause the video then and think about what stands out. Can you spot anything that impressed you? What Dave Forrester techniques were being used? Okay. So I say to you today, my friends, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. So pause the video, have a think, what's being used, make a list, make a note, what's being used, what technique is it? Off you go. Okay, so some of the ones I've spotted, and I hope you've got them. I'll go through some of the quite straightforward ones first, and then I'll also add a layer of challenge now. There are some techniques being used that you might not have spotted, but that you could be using yourself would really push up the quality of your writing. So we had the direct address straight away. From the start, Martin Luther King is speaking to his audience, talking to them as if they are listening, and it's just him and them. Okay, he uses repetition. I think you notice the dream is being repeated several times throughout. It doesn't have to be in the same sentence, guys. It can be throughout, but we do not mistake that is probably the most thing we remember about this speech, the I have a dream speech. You just type that in, I have a dream, and you will always think about Martin Luther King. He has that emotive language where he's getting people to rise up and challenge what's going on. He wants that rebellious aspect to his language. He has alliteration being used, the state sweltering, and there's more repetition with sweltering again. And then he has these personal pronouns, my children, and my little children, and he's using emotive language here. If you notice how children are used quite often to create sympathy and empathy, he wants people to feel sorry and feel and care about his children and their future. And then we also have a metaphor. Now, some people worry that they can't use things like similes and metaphors in this type of writing. Well, that's not true. Of course you can. You might not find them as often as you would in storytelling, creative writing, but you can still use them for sure. So an oasis of freedom and justice is a metaphor. It's not a real oasis. Are those little areas of the desert where there's water and trees and fruit and things like that. It's like a little corner of amazingness that you would find in a horrible dry desert. So he's using that metaphor to really emphasize what he's trying to say. So some of the more top end ones, which I hope you might also maybe think about spotting and using yourself, is we have, let's get on my arrows in first, sorry. So we have flattery. He actually talks to the audience as if he knows them, and he's not overdoing it. He's not being like, you amazing people, but he's getting them involved by friends. And he also using collective pronouns. So he had the personal pronouns, mine, I, but then he's talking about us. He wants the audience to be involved with him, my friends, us, our, we are together in this. And it really gets the people on his side. There is allusion here. Now, if you were using allusion in literature, allusion is the technique used where a writer will appeal to something the audience are already aware of. So, for example, in A Christmas Carol, the writer Dickens uses the allusion of Father Christmas for the ghost of Christmas present. We, as a reader, know what Father Christmas looks like. We know what Jesus looks like, and he makes Ghost of Christmas Present look a bit like both of them. So what Martin Luther King here is talking about is the American dream. All Americans will be familiar with that term. It's about being and living in America and having freedom and opportunity. Very, very familiar idea that they will all be familiar with. He actually uses a quote from a very old president, Thomas Jefferson. So he uses somebody else's words. And as you can see there, the speech marks, you can see he's referencing something, again, that the audience will recognize, and it's using somebody else's words to boost his own ideas. He also makes reference to historical and geographical references. So he's talking about places, Georgia, Mississippi, places and historical events, slave trade that was really, really, really big in America, especially in the southern states. And he knows that his audience are aware. They are aware of slave trade. They are aware. They are but potentially from Georgia, from Mississippi. He wants them to be able to recognize and relate because they will get more on board because they know what he's talking about. He also uses hyperbole, which is basically a fancy term for exaggeration, heat of oppression, sweltering states. He's making out like these state of Mississippi, for example, is really kind of hot and bubbling over with this horrible racial injustice, and using that pathetic fallacy. You can imagine going there and being really tense and on edge because of this horrible racism. And then finally, we've already talked about repetition, but repetition is here in this sense. It's actually what we call anaphora, where he starts sentences. I have a dream. I have a dream. I have a dream. So he isn't just going dream, dream, dream. He's using it to start. So his anaphora is basically using repetition at the start of sentences to keep coming back and reminding the reader. Okay, so that is how it's done. It's absolutely incredible speech, really, really famous, very, very memorable. So your turn now. I want you to pause the video. You should have your work booklet that you got posted out from school and that Miss Eggleton's very kindly put together. You are now going to look at the YouTube clip of Prince EA's school speech. So he does a speech about education in school, which is really, really good. I want you to watch that, and then I want you to take the time, so you should pause this video and find, the definitions. Some of them I've already taught you through, some of them you should already know. And then I want you to think about what example you could use. What could you use? Is there anything he uses? What is he using? What can you use for yourself? So this could take a while, so make sure you pause it, come back to the video at a later time, whichever is comfortable for you. So just a quick one to go through. The ones we've already talked about are most of these. The only ones we didn't speak about, anecdotes are personal stories. Anecdotes are personal stories where you have an example from your own life or someone you know, and it backs up your ideas. So an anecdote, if your topic was on racism, your anecdote could be a time where you personally have experienced racism yourself or someone you know has. Similarly, but not quite the same, is a case study, this one here. And a case study is very similar to an anecdote. However, it's a particular study of someone else. So it's a prime example. So you might have researched a particular story or a particular article or a particular example, and it's a case study to back your ideas. So it's very similar to anecdote. However, it'll be about someone you don't know. It'd be about a particular famous case or a particularly prime example. And finally, if you're not already sure, imperatives are basically verbs that show a necessary, an emergency, an urgency. We have to do it. You must get on board. This is something we have to change. Those really urgent commands, basically imperatives are what we call bossy verbs, okay, telling us to do something. Okay, so hopefully you would have completed that booklet and started to give yourself your own ideas for your own speech, things that you could use. Okay, so if you're looking to challenge yourself, particularly those people who are aiming high, wanting to get those better grades, which I'm hoping is everybody who watches this video, there are some extra quite difficult terms here that I've put, and I want you to think about what definitions you can think and any examples of your own for your own speech. Now, I only put a few on, but if you can see there's a link here at the side that would give you even more. There are loads. So, and also you can always add ones of your own. So take some time, pause the video and have a think about whether you can find any of these and any of these you want to use. Okay, so very quickly, just to clarify, anaphora is a repetition at the start of a clause. So I have a dream is perfect example of anaphora. Hyperphora is not as complicated as it sounds, guys. It's just a rhetorical question with the answer. So how would you feel if your own child experienced racism? Disgusted, of course. You would answer that question yourself. Okay. Collective pronouns, as I kind of briefly mentioned, are the pronouns that bring us together. They're those words we use, we, us, our, stuff that makes it seem like it's all a collective. We're together in this as a team. Epizeuxis is basically a repetition within the same sentence to add emphasis. So we need to, it needs to stop now, now, now. And that is the really basic form of repetition. So that's the fancy word for it, but it's probably the most basic. Now we have these Greek terms down here, which some of you might be aware of, some not. So logos is basically appealing to people's sense of logic. If something doesn't make sense or isn't logical, you can appeal that to the audience. How does it make sense that we can discriminate someone about something they can't change? Yeah, that sort of thing. On the opposite side of that, we have pathos, which is basically appealing to people's emotion. If you want them to feel something, okay, so pathos is about getting them to feel. So that's all your emotive language that you're automatically doing. Ethos is basically your sense of ethics, so getting them to feel morally worried or upset about something that shouldn't happen. And finally, kairos, I think that's how I pronounce it, where you are appealing to people's sense of time. And we see that quite often nowadays when people are talking about climate change and how little time we have left to change things. So getting them to understand it's urgent, times must change, or we need to move on and stop living in the past. Finally, I love this one, and this example actually is from Star Wars, believe it or not, but anadiplosis is basically repetition using the words to end one sentence and begin the next. So for example, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering, as Master Yoda said. So there's some excellent ones there. Hope people start trying to use them now. Okay, so task 2 then, guys, for your booklet was looking at Emma Watson's speech. So again, just looking on the YouTube clip when you get a minute, and then there are specific answers that Miss Eggleton has put in for you to really kind of start thinking about what techniques you're using, how are they working, are they effective? Because whatever you're talking about now, guys, everything I'm talking about today is stuff you should be able to borrow and use yourself. Okay, so pause the video, have a go at that second task for the Emma Watson speech. Okay, so we've just finished this lesson. I'm just going to go through some tips adding things to make your speech effective. So some interesting, starting in your writing in an interesting way, and the next lesson that I'm going to upload to YouTube will be all about how to make a great introduction. So don't stress too much about that yet. Talking to the person, talking to the audience, using those direct address is probably one of the most powerful tools you can use in effective speech writing. Urgency is amazing, so making sure we have urgency, we have modal verbs where with things that might happen. So what if this might happen, or perhaps this could go one way, but also there's imperatives. We need to do this. Okay, we need what about pronouns as well? So using a variety of different pronouns is really important. So personal is about I, how you want to get involved, and this is these two boxes here. So we have these two boxes where we're talking about our, us, those collective pronouns. Sorry, my mouse has decided to not work. Yeah, so this one, and then switching into use a variety. You could go for personal pronouns, to a direct address, to collective pronouns. I think this, you should do this, we should do this together. Really important as well, as I said right at the start, is choosing that vocabulary. So pick those particular verbs, make sure people are understanding what you're trying to get across, and they use those triples. Plenty of things you can be using. So please use this slide if it helps to add some different ideas. Okay. Finally, just to finish off, just a few more top tips for you. Variety is the spice of life, guys. So try and make sure you use a variety of different techniques rather than the same ones over and over and over again. It gets very boring if all you do is rhetorical question, rhetorical question. Less is more, actually, guys. So try and just sprinkle the techniques in throughout the speech. You don't need them all in one paragraph. You can put them in a variety of different parts. I would use them throughout. Try and use the pronouns and things more often, but the simile in one paragraph, the rhetorical question in another, depending. Don't underestimate the power of the vocab. The choice of the words is sometimes the most powerful tool. So actually choosing your words really, really carefully. So maybe if you do your first draft and then just go back and pick words you think you could change to make them more powerful is always a good step. Passion, I find some of the worst speeches I ever read or mark are the ones that are just really boring. They don't have any urgency, they don't have any passion behind them, and at the end of the day, your presentation is actually about very serious topics. These are discrimination topics, things that we should care about. So make sure you get that across the audience. As I said earlier on, please don't be afraid to use creative writing techniques. You can still use things like similes and metaphors and oxymorons and things, but they are there to use. They just you're more likely to see them in creative writing, but it can be helpful if you want to use something. Get some help. As Martin Luther King proved, you can use a famous, powerful speech from a quote from somebody else. So you don't have to, I'm not saying copy the whole thing, but certainly think about inserting some powerful quote if you can. And be subtle. Absolutely nothing wrong with using a little bit of flattery. Don't be too sycophantic. Don't be too over the top, and switching between first, second and collective pronouns would really work. So I believe this, you should do this, why don't we together get involved? And it really works. Those are the more subtle ones, and they do, promise you, they do really help. Okay, so if you are really still struggling, I've got a few different clips. I'm not going to play them now, but I feel free to play them in your own time. There are some fantastic speeches here that can really help, and you're more than welcome to Magpie. When I say Magpie, that's not copying and pasting the whole thing. It's about selecting ideas and changing them for your own purpose. So my favorite speech actually has to be a speech from a film. It's about Charlie Chaplin pretending or mimicking Adolf Hitler in the film The Dictator. He does this really powerful speech, and actually, if you've ever heard Paolo Nutini's song "Eye in the Sky," there was this very small snippet of it in that as well. Winston Churchill does his famous speech, we will fight them on the beaches, we will fight them in the air, we will fight them on the land. That's a really good one. He does sound very slurred, but it's a really, if you listen past his voice, you can hear how good it is. Leonardo DiCaprio is a really big climate change activist, and he made an amazing speech to I think it was the UN a few years ago. I've put a hyperlink so you can actually read the speech, guys, but you can also watch it as well. And finally, Greta Thunberg, which I think for you lot is really relatable, because she's still in school, she's still really young, and if she can do it, why can't you? So have a think, and hopefully these will help you, and you can start adding them to your own speeches. Anyway, I'll be back next lesson with how to make and write an amazing introduction. So I hope this has been helpful. See you soon.